All right. Hello, Erik and Donn.
Hi there.
Hey, how's it going?
Hello, dear viewers. And today we are going to discuss a very interesting topic that I thought about for the past couple of months, really in depth. And I'm curious to hear what Erik and Donn have to say. And the topic is software development in the age of AI. Just like many other software developers, I kind of ask myself, what's the future? What are the future technologies I should concentrate on? Whether software development is going to survive at all. Maybe it's time for me to go and get a real job. So, and I invited Erik and Donn to discuss this very interesting matter, which is, of course, on the minds of most, if not all, software developers worldwide. Before we jump into the actual discussion, could you please, guys, introduce yourself? Erik, maybe you first, and then Donn, just tell a little bit about yourself to the audience so people know what's your background, where you come from.
Sure. My name is Erik Dietrich. I'm currently the CEO of a marketing business, but I had sort of a long and winding path to get there. My background is computer science and software development. I have a bachelor's and master's in computer science, and I spent the first half of my career, 10 years, doing software development for companies, kind of climbing the org chart, earning developmental titles, senior software engineer, that type of thing. And then eventually going into leadership. And my last salaried role for somebody else was a CIO of a small company. Then I had career stage 2 as a consultant, at first doing a little bit of like freelance development work and training, but eventually management consulting in software organizations, often in the enterprise. And then phase 3 of my career, kind of came about almost by accident, because as I was consulting, I would write a lot of content. More and more companies were coming to me and asking me to write content for their brands. And so my wife and I partnered up, because her background was editorial, to found a business that at first did blog posts. And over the last 6 years has grown into a more of a marketing strategy partner for companies that are looking to reach people in the engineering tech org chart. So that is my best version of a relatively brief tour through my meandering career.
Thanks, Erik. Donn, what about you?
Yeah, my name's Donn Felker. I've been a software developer for over 20 years now, and started off in just web development early on, and did that for a number of years until I accidentally found Android one day, and right around that same time started consulting. So did consulting for close to 15 years, and actually recently took a full-time job, which we can talk about or dive into at another time. And during the time of consulting, started getting heavily into Android development, wrote a handful of Android books. I have a podcast on Android called Fragmented that some folks might listen to if you're an Android developer, and have recently been blogging, writing, and producing content in regards to freelancing, software development, starting up businesses, and so forth. And during the tenure of consulting, also ran a couple of small companies. One is a training company that taught programmers how to do mobile development, and we had over 30 instructors worldwide and so forth. So I've kind of had my hand in a bunch of different pots out there, but that's kind of the brief synopsis and background of where I'm from.
Thanks, Donn. Thanks. And as attentive of listeners who will notice, no one here claims any AI expertise. And I would like to just tackle this aspect up front, why I wanted to discuss AI with specifically Donn and Erik, who I knew don't have much expertise in this area. And the reason is that over the past, I have much less experience than either of you. So let's say I've been a software developer for about 10 years now. And over this relatively short period of time, I saw at least 3 big tech bubbles. So that was, let's say, crypto, digital currencies. That was NFTs. And to some extent, that was VR and AR stuff. And VR and AR, I put an asterisk here because in practice, this thing was on the minds of people since 90s at the very least. I remember I saw that as a child, and I thought that in 5 years I'll be able to put a helmet on my head and see the virtual reality. But it did get a lot of hype, new hype recently with the introduction of Oculus and products like that. And so far, neither of these very hyped technology products delivered on their premise. Yes, there was a impact, and surely financial for many people. But as long as we consider kind of the impact on society and on software development and whatever, I haven't seen much impact to these new technologies, even though in the moment it felt like the entire world is going to embrace this new thing, because how could it not be? And the people who work on these technologies, and I can't understand it totally, it's not like I'm not putting any fault on them, it's just the nature of the thing that if you believe something and if you work on it and if you invest all your effort into something, you kind of become an advocate, you kind of become evangelist, and maybe you subconsciously make the thing a little bit more prominent than it is. And that's why I'm less interested to hear about kind of the impact of AI on the society. And in this podcast, we're going to discuss software development specifically from AI people. I will definitely like to interview someone later about the technical aspect of AI. But as long as we discuss the impact, I would like to hear from Erik and Donn, specifically due to the reasons that you outlined now, due to your background. You have had a very rich software development experience, both of you. You also created a lot of content. You run businesses in the past and currently, so you manage people, and you are still, even though you're very successful, obviously, and have had a lot of experience, you are still relatively close to software development. So either you do software development right now, or at the very least, you blog about software development, or run a blogging company about, or run a consulting company about software development. So that's why I specifically asked you to come to this podcast, and that's why I'm so interested to hear your opinions on this topic, and not any AI expert who will be much more familiar with the technology than I imagine any of us here right now. And so the first question, no one can predict the future, right? So we will not even try to say that we know what will happen in 10 years. 10 years is a very, very long time, and stuff changes quickly in the world. So let's say that we want to kind of put our collective imagination together and think about what can happen in the next 3 to 5 years with software development roles. So the first question would be, how you find the current state of these AI tools? Well, how do you use them? Do you think they help? And if they help, how would you rate not rate specifically, but do you think it provides like 10% boost to your productivity, 50% boost, or it's a game changer that can, on average, like make you twice more productive or even more than that? So Erik, maybe I will start with you and then Donn.
So far, in terms of my day-to-day, most of what I do, if I'm not on meetings, which is most of my day, is research and development type of activities. And my day-to-day productivity isn't really the sort of thing that would be impacted a lot by these types of tools, but I have had interaction with them to some degree in running R&D type experiments for content creation, content strategy, that kind of thing for our clients. And this has involved kind of, like spikes, if you will, from the agile world of trying out, like, using, for instance, just to get very specific, a tool like ChatGPT to generate an outline for a blog post based on SEO recommendations, or to generate a blog post from an outline. And I think there is, depending on the nature of the content being created, for instance, there's a real range. So if you are creating a blog post that answers the question, what is such and such technology, and it's been around for a while, say you were going to write something like, what does DevOps mean? That type of wisdom is easily crowdsourced to the historical internet, so the tool does quite well at answering that question. If you're looking for something that's more time sensitive in nature, opinionated, it does quite poorly. So my experience so far has been, if you find the right use cases for it, it can be a tremendous lift from a productivity perspective, at least for the people that are doing work, on Hit Subscribe's behalf. And if you are looking at the wrong use cases, it can be near useless, or even worse if it starts, making things up that aren't true.
Which happens, unfortunately, quite often.
I'd say, to summarize, for me, it seems to be about identifying places where it's a good fit and then taking advantage of it.
Nice. Don, what about you?
So I have been interested in AI since it came out. And that kind of goes back to the original days of when we would just start talking about neural networks and just kind of understanding what was possible. But I didn't really know how it would fit into the picture. And nothing really made any real difference in my life until ChatGPT came out. And that's when I really started exploring with what AI could do for me. And for me, I like to see what I'm working with and see how I can use it as a tool to accomplish whatever task that I'm working with. So there's different things that I might use AI for, and I do use AI for. I might use it for content generation, which is, just like Erik spoke of, like perhaps you're going to help craft some type of blog or something like that. I might also use it for ideation. I use that a lot. So I might have an idea about, hey, can you give me 10, here is a snippet of text, or can you give me 10 ideas for blog posts that talk about, Android development with, databases. It might spit out 10 of them. That just gives me good ideas. And then from there, I kind of flesh things out. I don't use it really to write any content or anything of that nature, but it does help with creation of it. I also use, and there are a few tools that I've used here that I'll list them out. Like I use mainly for content generation will be something like ChatGPT. I'll use Notion AI, which I'll talk about in a second. And then of course, there's the visual content generation, which is like Midjourney and DALL-E. And I've used all these and still continue to use all of them. And so the two different buckets mainly for me is the content generation. I'll use it for ideation, but for the coding component, for the software stuff, I am mainly using ChatGPT and GitHub Copilot. On a day-to-day basis, for the listeners that aren't aware, I am programming for probably anywhere from 8 to 12 hours a day. And then I wake up very early in the morning to work on some of my own projects and then work on, regular work stuff during the day, regular work day. And during the day, I've worked with ChatGPT and Copilot every day, probably for the last 4 months. And it's important to note that I work remotely, and I have worked remotely for over 15 years. And to me, the ChatGPT and Copilot stuff, especially ChatGPT, has given me what I've been missing for a long time in a remote workspace. I work remotely. I don't have any coworkers around me. I don't work in a co-working place. So I am isolated inside of, this back room back here. And sometimes I'll just...
all of us can understand you and relate.
I'll hit a wall and I won't even know what to do. Google's not working. I can't find what I'm looking for. And what I've learned is through ChatGPT is I can actually talk to ChatGPT like it's a coworker. I can explain, here is the data model I'm working with. Here is an API I'm working with. I want to do X, Y, and Z. How can I do that with this technology or this language? And then what it will do is it'll give me examples. I'm like, oh, I didn't think of that. Okay. Can you change it to do it this way or this way or this way? And I've found that it's been very useful for me as a developer to get kind of almost like a AI coworker to help kind of show me different things. Now we can get into the weeds about if it's correct or not correct, but it has helped me, and in my opinion, probably become 1.5 to 2 times as effective as a developer to get things done on a day-to-day basis. So again, content creation we can get into, but that's how I use it for software.
Great, amazing. So from my perspective, I'm relatively old-fashioned and conservative when it comes to tools. Mm-hmm. And therefore I missed all this revolution until it basically knocked on my door. So I tried this. The first thing I tried was ChatGPT 4, and I was completely blown away by it. Mm-hmm. I just wow, this is so good. And I happily pay the price for it. I'm sure that it will get cheaper over time as more and more players join, but it's totally worth the money. And the tool gives me just superpowers in some aspects. Unfortunately, I haven't tried Copilot because right when all these tools came around, I kind of switched from software development to more content creation. So I have a less need of Copilot right now, but I will definitely go back. I'm a developer at my heart, so it's just a matter of time until I start working on another project, and then I will give Copilot a try. But yeah, definitely. I also use ChatGPT, as you described, to kind of perform some high-level ideation, exploration, to ask questions, and it does feel like you have, maybe not fully capable, but it does feel like you have a co-worker with you who you can at least bounce some ideas off. Sometimes the coworker hallucinates,
Yeah.
but we are very early into this technology, and so I guess it will get better relatively quick. And said all that, I was very surprised because for me, okay, again, I'm relatively old-fashioned, so I discovered all this trend relatively late when ChatGPT 4 was already out. And for me, it was like, I'm trying ChatGPT 4 because everyone just praises this tool. And the next thing, I'm listening to one of my favorite podcasts, and I hear people who are much more accomplished than me discuss the possibility of AI bringing down planes and bringing down the global financial system. And I'm like, we went very quickly from helping to write code to bringing down financial systems. And therefore, there is this gap. And also on the same podcast, they constantly use this for you at the very least. Back then, they used this phrase of exponential growth in the capabilities of AI tools. And from my perspective, given the jump from ChatGPT 3.5 to 4, which happened in a couple of months, if the growth will be exponential, then today we will probably have Skynet and Terminators on the street. And so my question, and it's not a question, but I just wonder, how do you see like the trajectory of these tools over the next, let's say, couple of years, and whether you expect, because I think even though, let's rule out the possibility of artificial general intelligence, right? So that's kind of philosophical topic in some sense. So if we assume, if we kind of give the possibility to artificial general intelligence, which is basically like human-like intelligence with these tools, with all the capabilities and the ability to self-improve, then yes, we face some runaway intelligence and no one knows what will happen. So let's just put that aside, assume that this won't happen. So how do you see the development of this tool? And do you expect the impact of these tools to be as bombastic as people say that there is several months ago, and some say even today?
I'll go first on this one. I have, in my opinion, there is, well, one of the ways that I like to look at this is the same way that we look at a surgeon who utilizes robots to perform operations. The surgeon might be a heart surgeon or a brain surgeon, but they might operate the tools necessary to perform this very delicate and precise surgery. However, the doctor still needs to know how to do everything by hand. They need to be an expert inside of brain surgery, heart surgery, or whatever they're going to do. But they're utilizing the tool to do the job more effectively. And that's the way that I see AI at this point, and probably for the near future. I don't think it's going to do something like replace a software developer. It might replace very low-level entry things like, hey, how do I do X, Y, and Z? But as someone who understands software, computer science, I need to be able to kind of use that tool to help enhance what I do on a day-to-day basis, almost like a surgeon is going to use one of these surgical tools to help them make them become a better surgeon.
That makes a lot of sense to me. I'm thinking about just 20 some years ago when I was an undergrad in a computer science program, I took coursework in AI and robotics. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because that's originally what I wanted to do. So I remember, following those disciplines and developments in the world very closely, like, around the year 2000. And it seems like ever since then, we've been hearing about how AI was imminently going to replace all these things. I mean, that's been going on for 20 years. I think the real difference maker is now you have this, does ChatGPT pass the Turing test? Is that established? It seems like it would, but
I'm not sure.
As far as I know, there were systems that passed Turing tests even before ChatGPT.
So, 20 years ago, that was like an amazing thought that something could pass the Turing test. And then let's say it does, or it's close enough to be within discussion range. When that happens, I think people tend to anthropomorphize it. So it feels like you're talking to a human. And then because of that, you start to view the thing as human and having human ambitions like Skynet or taking over the world. And, setting that aside, as you mentioned, Vasily, I think it still has ramifications for what people think is going to happen in their day-to-day job. That like they see the art of the possible and they start to ascribe things to the technology. Like I've heard, in our world, people say SEO won't be a thing anymore. Why would anyone ever do this? Because the generative AI can answer searcher questions. And the thing I always think in response to that is, okay, so go do it. Go completely replace it, SEO, and then the devil is in the details. And this is where I've been doing some experiments. Like there are some keywords that, yes, you could probably use the generative AI to address. There are some where when you do it, it doesn't have the latest information or it has all these problems. And so when I think about what I would see happening over the next few years in terms of people's day to day, I think there's this like sort of wave of all things are possible, and it'll come crashing down a bit in terms of when people actually go to implement this and they find all the edge cases. Oh, this isn't going to replace everything. And when the dust settles, my guess is you'll start to see drudgery eliminated. So like I think of all the years I spent around application development where like these custom app dev shops would just like go from company to company banging out forms over data like boilerplate code. That's the perfect example of something that I don't think a human needs to do anymore. Like so I guess if I'm looking out at the next few years, I think there will be a shakeup that will eliminate a lot of toil type of work that probably shouldn't have been done by humans recently anyway. And there will be just more of a push to get that out. And then kind of to Don's point, to like let experts, like somebody who knows how to build systems, leave aside the boilerplate stuff and just focus on the valuable problems.
Great take. And this actually kind of reminds me of something that I thought. So speaking of the dumb stuff that you need to do as a programmer, I hate doing user interface development because really it feels like a low level, almost mindless job until you get to some tricky stuff, right? There are some stuff and there's foundational stuff. Like for example, big companies, they usually employ some UI toolkit teams that design and implement the foundation, but then it's a lot of really boring work implementing one screen at a time. And actually this work is pretty much a copy paste from one format to another, right? So you get it in the form of, let's say, Figma or something, and you convert it to source code that works. Again, there are edge conditions that you need to take into account. So you do need a developer there, but most of that is just automatic conversion. And no wonder people try to implement automatic conversion tools for many, many years in this respect. And one of the areas where I so eager for the AI to take over is really doing that, because I see, and maybe some people just like doing UI stuff and they won't agree with me, but for me personally, I see the conversion from, let's say, Figma to source code as kind of technological lack. Like in the past, when we didn't have copy machines and printers and all this technology, people would copy books by hand. They would just copy letter by hand because they didn't have the technology. But then the technology came around, so they could make just print books. And then we have internet, so you don't even need to print books anymore to consume them. So in some sense, I feel that UI development, Erik, what you mentioned, is really something that UI should take over, because so many hours spent converting from one format to another, which really feels like a useless work, at least for me. And again, that's a personal take on that. And there's a question asked is like, in your estimation, how many developers have their careers tied to specifically UI development? Let's say if tomorrow we can automate UI conversion, and let's say the major frameworks, let's take Android, iOS, React, and some others, and major frameworks now roll out AI tools that perform this conversion automatically, almost instantly, and almost flawlessly. In your estimation, how many developers lose their job? And I put an air quotes here because I will ask you, what do you think about losing a job as a developer? But let's say, how many developers work and have their careers? In your estimation, I know it's a difficult question, but just as a ballpark figure.
I think that's something that's really hard to answer. I don't even know. So I'm just going to throw like a round number out there and just say, hey, maybe it's 5, maybe it's 20%. But I'm actually going to delegate back to what Erik said, because this is something I've noticed as well. And what he said, which is very important, is the devil is in the details. It might be able to do some generic taking you from point A to point B, but every company does something particular. You've got legacy code, you've got a design system, you've got something you need to match up to, and something's going to need to be tweaked. And that's where you're still going to need the developer to go in there. But now there will be some change, but maybe it's just going to be a shift. And I think that's kind of the big thing that I'm looking at is we've now been able, instead of copying books by hand, we can now print them. So now the resources that we're copying books can do something more important. And so I think developers are going to be able to do something more important. I don't know what that is yet. We're still we're developing in this, genre of AI, generative work, et cetera. And perhaps there's going to be a new type of technology that we don't even know about yet that we're going to focus our minds on going forward. So it's hard for me to say.
Yeah, I'm in the same camp, I guess. Like, it's hard for me to put a figure on it, like as a thought exercise, because this is something that happens with the rise of any new technology that saves or automates work in some capacity. Is you eliminate jobs in the short term, but like take, say some kind of farm equipment comes out, like a self-driving plow, or I don't know. You eliminate the job of the farm worker that was doing that before, but then you create the job of the plow maintainer and the plow programmer. So I think, like, in the end, the long term is that it probably won't eliminate jobs. It will just change their nature. I think in the short term, it will eliminate jobs that were probably in some danger of being eliminated anyway. And what I mean is, if you're going around and you're just, sort of doing this rote copy of UI from one format to another, or you're just writing boilerplate code of some kind, forms over data, CRUD operations that are very similar. I don't know that generative AI is the only threat to that. Just the creation of some framework up to this point would threaten that. Like, if you're in a position where your job could be replaced in this fashion, your job probably wasn't that secure to begin with. You're just, a management consulting comes in and is like, hey, you can do this in a better way, and then your job's gone anyway. So I think in the short term, it might eliminate and certainly create confusion with jobs. In the long term, I don't think it would do anything except change their nature. I think the biggest threat is in the shortest term, and that's where, like, especially with everything going on in Silicon Valley, if you have organizations that are looking to cut headcount, they might do it not because they've got a plan to use the generative AI per se, but because that's the way the winds are blowing, and you have people saying things like, I'm sure ChatGPT can do this, so I'm going to let these 5% of my staff go, and then task the others with figuring out how to make what I just said true. Whether that turns out to be true or not, I don't know, but the jobs would still be gone.
Yeah, I would even say, I'm pretty sure, was it IBM? I think IBM CEO went out and said that they expect to cut some amount of workforce because they will replace it with AI. And I immediately thought, well, this sounds much better than we need to just cut those workers because we need to take care of our shareholders and our share price, right? So it's a very good excuse in some manner, and it's very difficult for me to discern real innovation and expectation of a real innovation from just, the mass layoffs that happen in the industry-wise. And then it's a very good kind of escape from actually telling people, you know what, our share price needs to go a little bit higher, so let's mass lay off people. So yeah, that's also happened. And actually, speaking of what you said about people replacing, both of you mentioned replacing, I constantly go back to this kind of transition which happened before any of us was born, but the cars, automobiles replaced horses. So there were probably millions and millions of people employed in this horse industry, whether they were taking care of horses or they were like carriage riders. I'm not sure if that's the term even, but all of them have lost their job over a span of, let's say, 10, 20 years. And I'm sure that at the time they also kind of say that, they're replacing us, et cetera, et cetera. But in the grand scheme of things, whenever there wasn't like a huge shift, a huge problem with this massive technology shift that rendered like millions of people unemployed. And say that still, when this switch to automobiles happened, I'm sure that many people suffer, because if you are, let's imagine we are like in this era of switching, of changing, we have horses and we have automobiles on the streets, and someone does not see it coming, and so they invest all their time into becoming the best horse groomer. So do you think there are like horse grooming jobs in software development today that you can relatively, well, let's not say relatively safe, but you would imagine are the first one on the chopping block of AI? Would you see something coming for people? So just, if someone is an experienced new developer and they think like, okay, I don't know what will happen, but I would like to avoid doing the biggest mistakes. Like, where should I not invest my time? And I will give you one example while you're thinking, just to prompt this. I thought about it quite a lot. And again, I always can come back to this UI stuff, right? So today, at least in our world, me and Donn, we are mobile developers, and there's a great shift to cross-platform development. Basically, we have two major platforms in the world, Android and iOS. And for years upon years, many companies tried to bridge the gap and basically write application once instead of twice, even though it's the same application for Android and iOS, basically. And much of this vendor locking in these platforms is in the UI. And that's why all these UI frameworks, native UI frameworks that companies roll out, that's where they look for the vendor lock-in. And today, there are several new kind of frameworks that aim at that. And I kind of think, like, if we are on the path and the best minds in the world working on automating UI creation, does it really matter whether we use 1, 2, or 3 UI frameworks? If in 5 years, I agree with you that it won't be 100% ideal, but let's say we cut the cost of implementing UI by 80%. Does it really worth it investing time into these cross-platform UI frameworks if the UI will become so much more cheaper that people and CTOs and CEOs at companies will stop constantly eyeing these cross-platform tools to save costs? This kind of stuff I'm looking for. Do you see other areas where this can happen?
The thing that occurs to me isn't so much to do with any specific tech or stack, but something that I used to see a lot in the enterprise, and I'm assuming is probably still true. If you go to Fortune 500 companies that are not tech companies, banks, manufacturing, what a lot of them will do is, I don't know the term, maybe like stratified. They have a very vertical org chart, even among different flavors of software engineer. And so they will have this entire sort of class of people, various flavors of architects, or maybe senior engineers or leads, whatever they're called. And those are the people that are actually thinking about solving programming problems. And they'll have a whole other class of programmer, generally is common to outsource this to like large, relatively inexpensive custom app dev type agencies. I'm not going to name any names. I don't want to get myself in trouble, but they'll do that, or they'll hire very junior people. And they're essentially breaking up the programming into the thinkers and like the laborers, if you will. So these laborers are getting method stubs or whatever, here's your method stub. It needs to do this. And they're writing 15 lines of code, things of that nature. That style of programming, I think, probably would be the first on the chopping block, I'm guessing, because if you can explain it and break the problem down that easily that you just need someone to type out the code, the generative AI can do that. But I don't know that that's like something that someone thinking about going into programming would encounter, other than maybe just being a junior developer or not having a lot of options. But I could see that going away. And that maybe begs the question about whether it'll mean something a little different to be a junior developer in the future. You're not like cutting your teeth doing simplistic things anymore. That might be interesting.
For me, I don't know if I see for software, if I see certain positions going to the wayside at all. I see them just changing. You might not be writing HTML and CSS anymore, or you might still be writing it, but you might also have to do something else on top of it. Maybe you're going to be doing some programming on top of it. You're going to be tweaking the output of that generative code that comes out of there. But I don't think we're going to see a complete removal of certain jobs. That's for software. I don't know how it's going to go for other industries, but I think what you said earlier was interesting, because we talked earlier about how a lot of sometimes our collective intelligence is just going to shift to another problem. And the same thing happened with the horse groomers and et cetera to the automobile industry. And that's a perfect example because the automobile industry is actually the reason why I am in the position I'm in. So my background is actually in mechanics. So previously, before becoming a software engineer, I was a motorcycle mechanic and an auto mechanic. And my family has a long history of automobile mechanics in it. That's what we've done. So I was raised that same way, and just happened to find computers at a period of my life when I was being a mechanic, and I just kind of just continued down that path. So I think at that point in time, I see mechanics, for example, like we still need them, but a lot of mechanics rely on the computer tools. And I was just speaking to a mechanic at the dealership next to my house here. He was fixing my truck. They had to, install the computer, plug the computer into it and get the codes and see what's wrong with it so they can run the diagnostics. So, oh, we have something wrong with your wiring harness. So we still need mechanics. We still need that. But their shift has now just changed. They don't need as many mechanics, but they are much more effective at what they do. My big thing that I wonder about is the other industries right now, because I've heard of certain people like copywriters have said, hey, my company laid off a bunch of the copywriters or laid off some paralegals or something like that. Those are the ones that I'm wondering about. Are those going to go?
Customer support.
I don't know. Yeah, customer support.
Customer support is going to be eliminated almost entirely, in my opinion, because currently, at least the tools that I use, it's outsourced to lower GDP countries. So it looks like the main driving factor there is the cost. So if you can reduce the cost even more with these tools, that will be probably.
Maybe though, I don't know if I agree with that because I will see some people that do go that route because it is a cost savings, but I think those are also the companies that are going to get hit with customers that are unhappy with the customer support, because I know for myself being a customer that I much would rather talk to a real human being, as I did this morning with my email provider. I had a problem. I was able to speak to a human over chat. They were able to give me the information I needed. I could tell it was a human because we had just a natural conversation, and they had to dig into my account and find different things. But I do think that there's going to be some level of automation there, but there'll also be companies that realize, hey, this is still very important because people still want that human connection.
Yeah, speaking about human connection, it's a perfect segue into another topic that I wanted to ask you about. So when we think about software development, the immediate association is if conditions, for loops, a lot of code writing. But once you get past the point that, when you get past the complexity of a single solo project, the collaboration kicks in. And so the bigger the project, the more important the collaboration. And do you think these tools, AI tools, let's imagine that they can pass Turing test. Back to Turing test, by the way, Eric, I kind of thought about it, and ChatGPT cannot pass Turing test because it does not even attempt to pretend that it's a human. If you ask him this tool,
because if you ask it, it just will tell you.
Exactly, yeah, it's probably just legal kind of stuff, but yeah, it can pass if it tells you that it's not a human, so it can give you human advice. But let's say we have a perfect AI that you cannot distinguish from a real human, but it's not a real human. So would you, and my personal opinion that collaboration is super important, and I know that Donn, you mentioned that, and I feel it daily. Like since I became a freelancer and I started working remotely, the biggest problem for me, the biggest thing that I miss are lunches with my coworkers.
Yeah.
So that's like an ongoing thing, and that's actually what makes me constantly think about going back to work, because sometimes it's really hard, and people who never did that don't necessarily understand how hard is that to work alone day in, day out. And so my question to you is, what do you think the role of collaboration and human connection in software development, and if you remove that, how detrimental that could be to the process itself? Like because I'll frame it even better. In that same podcast, one of my favorites, where people they're all venture capitalists and they're all with tech backgrounds, so they know what they talk about, and they mentioned that they expect to see a solo founder company, solo developer company reaching 1 billion valuation. And do you think it's possible? And technically, from the technical standpoint first, and second, from the psychological standpoint of a developer working alone, and what will be the benefit of having a company of four people, even though one can do the work?
When you speak about collaboration, do you mean just communicating and just having that human connection, or actually having the human be able to answer questions, or is it a combination of everything?
A combination of everything, just having someone around that you both work with professionally, but also, as I mentioned, during lunches we haven't spoken too much about work, but it's kind of shared social activity with people you spend a lot of time with, and you speak off topic, but I found this still very super important. And when I have a chance, when I work with clients in Israel where I live, when I have a chance to visit their office, I always kind of jump on the opportunity because it gives me a little bit of a kind of societal boost. So yeah, generally speaking, like, do you think, imagine a world where AI can do anything. Do you think that solo developers, solo entrepreneurs working with these AI tools will be more efficient than teams or companies of people where there is a human connection, and what's the role of that?
Erik, I would love to hear what you say.
So the thing that strikes me about the premise is that I have sort of a like a workaround answer, if you will. The thing that keeps striking me about this is, like, let's say that you have a single founder that's going to reach $1 billion company valuation just by themselves. The thing that kept occurring to me as I'm trying to picture that, and I wouldn't put my knowledge of this up against VCs and try to say I can predict this better than them. But the thing I'm thinking is, okay, so actually creating a piece of software, if we're talking about a SaaS, is one piece of founding a company with $1 billion valuation, but you also have to go out and raise capital. You have to go out and find business. So there's these roles, sales, marketing, raising capital that are relationship based, and there's probably plenty that I'm leaving out. So in this world of hypothetical AIs, let's say that there were AIs that could do all of those things and partner with you. If I were the person that made that AI, what you're really talking about is that you are using my product to be your co-founder. I want a piece of that equity. If I've created your co-founder, I should get a cut of that business. So that's like, it doesn't seem to me like you can have a single person create a $1 billion company, most likely, even if you could sub in this magical agent to serve in various roles. At some point, like, who owns that intellectual property? It's not just this thing that's come out of the ether to help you. That's somebody's tool that is, a co-founder as a service, if you will. I know that doesn't really answer the question. I mean, I think, and then it would also be the question of, is an AI currently capable of going out and helping you raise capital? I mean, maybe it could help you write a pitch deck or something, but it's not going to give the presentation. So I don't know. I think collaboration with other humans is incredibly important. And if AI got to the point where it could replace that, then there's interesting questions of intellectual property and ownership and who gets paid, even in that hypothetical world.
I think that a company of one at $1 billion valuation, in my opinion, is just not even possible. I know I'll probably get some run up the flagpole about that, but if you think about it, why is a company valued at $1 billion? Because it provides value. How does it provide value? It does something. Well, how does it do something? It runs. It does a service. It provides some utility of some sort. But at some level, somebody has to maintain that and run that from an admin perspective, like Erik said, sales, marketing, etc., support. Being someone who has been a solo founder a couple of times, it's very difficult to run things alone, and I've never been able to do it by myself. I always find myself having to hire at least part-time help for support, maybe marketing, maybe content generation, SEO, something of that nature. I've never been able to do it by myself, though I do think the word, like, a company of one is kind of a misnomer. I think it's more like, yes, there's one founder, but from there you have to build a team. And I think that's important because if you're thinking about a business and it's worth $1 billion, well, why is it worth $1 billion? Because someone wants to buy it. Okay. When somebody wants to buy a business, they don't want to buy something that's reliant on one person, because the bus factor, which if you look it up, if you're not familiar, the bus factor is through the roof. Because if I'm that person and I have built a company worth $1 billion and I were to pass away tomorrow, all of that knowledge is, goes with me. Usually you'll find that companies sell much better and easier, especially with less terms attached to them after the buyout. You don't have to stay on for 2 years, 5 years, or whatever. If you have a company that has processes, systems set up with a team where the founder can kind of come in and say, hey, look, I'm just going to kind of help you run the product, or maybe I don't even need to. I've got the sales team, the marketing team, these, standard operating procedures set up completely, and my team runs it. So I think that's something that, a lot of people have to think that, hey, am I going to create a company of one? Yes, you can be a solo founder. And I think that's been, there is one good book on that by Paul Jarvis, and it's actually called Company of One. But he talks a lot about inside of that book of you need to hire external help. And it might just be part-time help that you get from Upwork or some other type of service, and that's okay. But actually building a company where it's just you yourself doing it and AI is on the other side, I just don't see how that's possible. There's just too many balls in the air that have to get handled. If your server goes down at the same time you've got customers emailing you, you're having billing dispute issues through Stripe, good luck. I've been there. It's almost nearly impossible to handle by yourself. And to answer the collaboration component of it, I do think there is some level of collaboration that's needed. You can still be a solo founder even and not have any teammates around you. And this is something I've been involved with myself many times. However, you do have to watch your psychological and mental state very closely, because you can get yourself into a real deep funk if you don't have any social interactions. And I have fallen into that state before. And for me, having working remotely for 15 years, I don't go into the office often. In fact, I try not to. I have 2 children I have to take care of. It's very hard for me to travel places. So what I do is and we actually were talking about this before recording, is I go to the gym every morning and I go to a group fitness class. And it's specifically a group fitness class because I want to see and talk to other people. To me, that's my social interaction every day. That's my social hour. That's how I get that human connection every day, because I know when I come sit at this desk, I may or may not have a video call. And if I don't have that social interaction, eventually you'll just find yourself in a deep funk every day.
And I will segue this question into something maybe loosely related, but I'm very curious to hear your opinion on the rest. What do you think about remote work and whether it's suitable for most programmers? That's something I've been thinking about a lot, and I have some loosely held opinion, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
I don't think it's meant for everybody. I'll just say that. The percentage, I don't know, but I know, and even given where you are at in your career, it's probably not beneficial. If you're just starting out in your career and you are very green, you don't really know that much, it'll be very difficult and frustrating to work remotely if you do not have day-to-day interactions. It is possible. If you are having, daily, multiple Zoom calls per day, you're doing pair programming sessions over video, you can do it. It's not as easy as working in an office, but it's possible. But I do not think that it's for everyone. It does require a certain level of discipline that not everybody has. It's very easy to get distracted to, hey, the dishes need to be done. The kids are going on. I've got to go run this appointment over here. Hey, I could sleep in. I'm not even going to get dressed today. I'm going to be in my pajamas. Everything that I do is very deliberate. A fridge
that you need to check routinely.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not for everybody, in my opinion, but it can work in certain circumstances.
I've also been remote for a long, long time. And so the interesting thing is, even while I was doing remote work, I would go on site and consult with clients. Like for a while, I was doing 100% travel. And often those clients would be doing agile transformations, and the companies presiding over that would be telling them adopt extreme programming principles. So pair programming in person, use a whiteboard, go low tech, use cards, etc. And there were a lot of people for whom that way of working really resonated and wouldn't trade working in like a bullpen style open office for the world. I wasn't one of them. I mean, I enjoyed that. I enjoyed the social interaction, but it was hard for me to be productive. I would find that after a day of doing that. I would then quietly work in the evening by myself.
Yeah.
So I really think it's less about the nature of the work. I think programming by the right person can inherently be done remotely. I can't imagine even 20 years ago any technological reason it couldn't be. But I think the personalities involved will really determine that. And to Donn's point, it's been my experience both from the hiring side and collaboration side. There are some people who are temperamentally unsuited for it, either because they don't like it or because they just don't have it in them to hold themselves accountable and get to work. Like there are people who just need structure and they'll even admit to it. So I think it's really about the people and less about the actual work.
Yeah, I kind of agree. And the reason I'm so interested about the social and the kind of personal aspect of that is because when I started in programming, when I was green, I heard a lot about, outsourcing to lower GDP countries and how, let's say what it is, how Indian programmers will take our jobs. But over the years, I haven't seen that happening. There's definitely a lot of outsourcing, but all the companies, all the major companies still stuff their offices full with local programmers, everybody they can get their hands on. And Israel is quite a vibrant high-tech scene. So the demand for software developers here is very high, even though the developers here are very expensive. And the same, I would imagine, happens in Silicon Valley and other tech hubs in the United States. So all the developers are employed, even though it will be 10x, maybe even more cheaper to outsource that to lower GDP countries. So there's definitely some aspect of all of that that, in my opinion, speaks more to the human nature rather than to mere kind of dry financial calculation. And let's say I'm sure that programmers in lower GDP countries can do everything I can do in Israel, at least some of them. So there's no real reason to hire me in Israel when you can, if all you want is to cut costs and hire the cheapest but still people who can do the work, then basically there's no reason to hire me. And in the same manner, I suspect that AI tools will face the same fate. Yes, definitely some portion of the work that can be done by AI will be done by AI, but even if we assume that 100% of the work can be done by AI, there will still, I suspect that the companies will still stuff their offices full with local developers, just because some interesting human factor, which I never can put into words. Actually, maybe you will help me if you know the feeling and what I'm talking about.
I'm not sure about a specific word for it, but one thing that strikes me, that's a great parallel, I think, because as I look forward, I think that there's going to be a demand or a desire, if you will, for people who are sourcing work through humans to kind of stamp a badge on it and say, we are a human, work product company. We do not use generative AI. Probably in creating content would be a big one where you are worried about turning your audience off, through the perceived maybe low effort thing of just having the AI write all your content. And I've seen this over the years. There are a lot of boutique app dev services firms that will go out of their way to very ostentatiously mention, we don't offshore. And I could see a similar parallel there where companies will develop ways of like proving we are not using AI for customer support. We are not using AI to create our content, and that you have this. And then, that's not to say there will be others who go the complete other way and are like, yes, we unapologetically use it for all of these things. We want to cut costs. I think there might be this kind of like bifurcation of markets that way. And it's an interesting parallel that you drew to offshoring.
Yeah, it's also an interesting idea that this will be a differentiator. Companies that state that they don't use AI for specific things. Well, I don't think anyone would be able to state that they don't use AI at all, because that would be like a huge business disadvantage. But yeah, that's definitely interesting that we don't use AI for our core product, let's say.
I think they'll also see, depends on the organization as well. Just as some organizations do very well with remote, I mean, you have multiple organizations that are 100% remote that are generating massive amounts of revenue. And then you have other companies that are generating the similar amount of revenue that just cannot for the life of them get remote to work. It's just however the company is being managed, perhaps that's just not in the culture. So I think we might see a similar thing for some AI stuff, where maybe the culture of the company just cannot adapt to whatever the AI stuff is doing versus, other companies that rely on it very heavily. Like Erik was saying, you might have companies that buy completely in unapologetically and say, hey, yeah, we're doing everything as much as we can AI, and we're just going to kind of tweak it to make it work. And other ones are going to say, no, we're not going to do it at all. So really depends on the organization too.
I've seen this already in the content business, that there are two things that I'll hear from customers. One that's common is, how do I know that nobody generating content, or how do I know that people who are creating content for us aren't using AI to do it? They really want that not to be done. And then we're also running some R&D like pilots with clients that are saying, how low can we bring the cost of creating content via using these tools? And the response is, we're taking on kind of a joint like R&D consulting engagement and saying, well, let's try it. Let's set up a complete generative AI blog post creation process. So already I see those kind of two opposite ends of the spectrum in the way people are reacting, at least with content creation.
Can you share any metrics with us about these interesting projects? Like how much can you bring the costs down if you use AI, if at all? Maybe the result is that the technology is not there yet.
Well, in SME content creation, the biggest source of expense is the SMEs. You're asking.
Could you define SME?
Oh, sorry, subject matter expert. So in the case of like the tech world, it's asking software engineers to write blog posts. That's an expensive person in the market compared to just getting some random person with a communications degree. So if you eliminate that and you can write a passable blog post, that's a significant cost gone. Off the cuff, so far from what I've seen, I would say if you're writing, if you take like a blog program and you were to replace it with generative AI, that you could maybe cut 80% of the cost. There is still, it's not maybe 70. It's not quite an order of magnitude yet, let alone two, because there are so many like edge cases as we've been running this through. So you have an AI write a post and you're like, oh my goodness, this is an actual blog post. But then you start reading through it and there are things that need to be cut. It needs somebody to do some quality assurance. And then those costs start creeping back up. So it's another devil is in the details thing. But there's no doubt you can realize significant cost savings. Then again, you don't know what the long-term ramifications are. So we're running some experiments on a property that we own to see about like how Google treats AI generated content, because I think Google has come out and said for SEO, we're not going to penalize people using generative AI, but I don't know. I wouldn't put it past Google to penalize like other AI generated content.
Do you think they have the capability to distinguish a blog post written by AI from a blog post written by a human being?
My guess is not yet, but it wouldn't surprise me if that was in the works and they did it pretty well. I mean, Google's pretty good at stuff. And they're they say a lot of things about how they feed their ranking engine, but nobody really knows. So what I tell clients, if we're going to run this kind of R&D, is like, there is a chance that if you generate 300 articles on your site in short order, Google will understand what's going on here and perhaps do some form of shadow ban. I don't think that's likely, but you might do this, you might cut a lot of costs and wind up kind of burned for it. Just throwing that out there that you ought to think about it.
Yeah, playing catch with Google is very difficult because they are on top of the algorithmic game. And by the way, it's very interesting because, well, sometimes I look for something for some, let's say, programming tutorial or something, and the first few posts that Google gives me, I wouldn't distinguish them from AI generated, right? Especially for if I need an opinion about architecture design, then usually I get high quality content from people who speak from personal experience, but there's no shortage of blog posts, of blog sites where people just, copy paste documentation stuff. And for some reason, Google ranks those relatively high. And I come across them and they're always stuffed with huge amount of ads all around the content, so you cannot even read it uninterruptible. I'm not sure why Google ranks this and how they don't penalize. Maybe because they are stuffed with ads. After I think about it, maybe that's the reason they can't allow this stuff. But how would you and Erik, and Don, you also you have a huge expertise in blog posting and content creation. You run this business of caster with instructors. Like, would you say that AI can basically replace all this low effort stuff, and maybe in the future we won't see people investing? Because I'm an active blogger right now. I try to kind of switch to content creation full time. First time I really tried this thing, and I do find myself asking, like, is it worth investing in my blog? So so what's the level of let's say content depth or content sophistication that in your estimation AI can already replace it, and what would be the future of blogging if, for example, ChatGPT will just take all my content, synthesize it into something else, and would provide the answer to people without linking to my website ever?
I think when it comes to the content and using generative AI, there are places where it's a good fit. I was talking a little bit about this earlier, but like, so in terms of like search engine theory, this is a lot of what we do with Hit Subscribe. Anytime somebody Googles something, they're really asking a question. They just leave words out of the keywords. So if somebody, I was talking about DevOps, if somebody types in DevOps, what they're probably asking is, what is DevOps? What does this mean? And for a question of that nature, where the internet contains all sorts of information that the AI can use and process and have in its data set, and it's relatively an evergreen answer, that's a very good use case for generative AI. Process all this wisdom on the internet, summarize it into an answer, answer a question, answer a very tactical question. What is DevOps? How do you get started with, whatever logging framework? That's a good fit. But I don't think AI is nearly as good a fit, or generative AI is nearly as good a fit for the kind of content that you might write on your blog as an influencer, let's say, or a consultant. And the reason is, even if you could train it to sort of write as and simulate you, the thing that your consulting clients are interested in is you and your expertise and your experience. They want to learn from that. And there's, they're not getting that if you're using a tool to generate content on your behalf. I mean, I think you can probably, use it for various flavors of ideation and perhaps editing and refinement or whatever. But at the end of the day, the content that somebody is creating about their unique shared experience, which is most of what influencer thought leader type content is, it seems like the wrong application of technology to use generative AI for that. So I don't perceive a threat to what you're talking, Vasily, about wanting to do, which is expertise-based content creation.
Interesting. Don, what do you think?
I actually have a question for Erik. I mean, given that you're in the space, how do you see, let's say I write a blog post right now, or a handful of blog posts that might have some personal opinion, personal anecdotes, experiences, etc. Let's just say they're technical in nature. In the back of my head, when I am writing these, I wonder if ChatGPT or AI is going to just pick up this content, and is it even worth me writing it? Am I still going to get any type of SEO out of this? Am I going to get for me in the past, it's always given me some type of, eventual recognition. I've got, consulting clients out of my writing, et cetera. But I wonder in the future, all right, is that going to go away? And I was wondering what your thoughts on that might be.
I think that with what you're talking about, say you write an article, a tutorial, here's how to do X, and historically, without necessarily planning for that, that's picked up search engine traffic for you. The generative AI content may eat into that, because you may get professional SEOs that do plan for that are now able to generate the kind of content that you were generating in a way they never could before. I think there is potentially some danger of that specific channel, that search engine traffic being reduced for you. But the content itself you could distribute in other ways. And I think what will emerge is people not wanting content that an SEO used ChatGPT to generate are going to find ways to find your content. So, let's say that's publishing on a community platform like dev.to or something of that nature. Somehow or another, they will pair themselves with that content. They'll follow you. They'll want that. It's just a question of figuring out new ways of reaching them.
Okay.
I also think I thought about it a lot, and I think that going forward, the personal brand will matter even more than it used to be, because people, like, once you can get the basics from the generative AI, and I put this in parentheses that there is a full blown legal battle to be fought here in the coming years about the copyright aspect of it, and if, for example, ChatGPT folks, OpenAI folks, monetize your data to train their AI, whether they need to pay royalties to you, and like this will take years to settle. And I hope one time, sometime get a lawyer who specializes in these aspects to a podcast, because it's very curious to me where the wind blows in this aspect, because I can't see it happening that tools like ChatGPT will basically just take all the data on the internet, synthesize it, replace them, and not pay any royalties to content creators. And Google, I think, very aware of that. Maybe that's why they're not that quick to press their full gas in on their bars stuff, right? So they have bars, but for some reason they keep it like you actually need to know that it's there to find it. It's not on their main page yet, maybe because it's not accurate enough. But I suspect that they're still kind of figuring out whether these tools really catch up, and two, what's the legal framework and what are the legal implications of all of that. So I'll put that aside. It's a huge discussion also. But what I do find very, like, I'm pretty sure about that, to say that if anyone would like to be a content creator in the future, it should probably not be enough. Well, at least as a solo content creator, right? I'm not talking about, like, Erik, you work with companies that want to promote stuff, but as a solo content creator, it will be even more important to have a personal brand, to have people want to consume your content because who you are, and not just because you wrote that content that is like technical enough for them. They want, and this goes back to the personal connection, right? They want to have some kind of a personal connection.
There's that parasocial, and then I think they also probably want unique insights. So anybody goes and asks ChatGPT, what is DevOps, you're going to get a similar answer. But if I ask a person that, or if I'm following somebody's blog and they write their unique take, I'm going to get an answer that is limited to that person's audience. I've thought about this when people ask me, like, what's going to happen on the search engine results page with everybody like creating blog posts. And my thought is, I don't know, it'll be kind of intriguing when like 5-10 different companies all have more or less the same blog post written. What happens there? And my guess is that's not what searchers are looking for. That's not what anybody's looking for. So they're right now it's all novel. Everybody is just getting used to this. But after a while, if you're getting the same answers to your question that everybody else is getting to their question, you might see new insights.
I do have also in that same vein, I have this theory that eventually, and I don't know how this will happen, but as humans, we're going to slowly be able to recognize AI content. Like, it might get difficult, but just think about when the internet first came out and ads first came out. Remember banner ads? And that was all the rage. Like, wow, banner ads were crazy. You made money. You couldn't not look at them. I can't tell you the last time I remember looking at a banner ad, and I'm sure I've seen 50 of them today. It's just I have now trained my brain to not look at them. And the same for certain ads. Like, I don't even see them anymore. Like on Google, I scroll right by the ads. I just happen to see a little ad thing. So I wonder at one point if we're going to get to the point where we can recognize this article just gives me the spidey senses that this is not a human written content. Because I know for myself, I want to read human written content. I might want to read Vasily's, take on Jetpack Compose because I know he loves it so much. And then some various other topics. But that's the personal brand at play. Like, I'm going to search out his content for that. And if I go ask a ChatGPT, it's going to give me almost like the collective consciousness answer, which seems very generalized, it seems.
The average.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's also, yes, I think, Donn, that probably that will happen, like the AI equivalent of ad blindness.
Yeah.
Like, I can already, it's my trade, so I can generally see when there's a content mill. And that's maybe or maybe not AI generated up to this point. It might just be that they're paying humans to bang out very formulaic articles. Like you do start to detect that, and I think people will avoid it, because why would I read an article that I could read for myself if I just asked ChatGPT a question? Like if I'm in the AI app, I can at least ask follow-up questions the way I can't with an article. So these things I imagine will be commodified, and I, I guess the long and short of it is, I very much think that personal branded content creation isn't going anywhere, and if anything, there might be more demand for it in a way.
Vasily, you asked a question about Caster and like video production. Are certain things going to go away with AI? I don't think so, because as someone myself who searches out for content, I've run across AI generated content, or even run across content that doesn't have anyone speaking and it just shows someone doing something on the screen and it's not engaging. I don't want to watch it. I skip to the next video. I think the same thing's going to happen here with a lot of this video content creation. People are still going to search out videos just like this one here that you're going to put out. They're going to want to watch the human interaction. They're going to want to see certain things happen. And that can't be done at this point in time with AI. And I think it's going to be hard to match, because everyone's so unique in their own abilities.
Yeah, and I think what you said now applies to even much broader context than just, content creation, because like, let's take, for example, software development, right? There are so many tools that can boost your productivity as a software developer, and so many tools that can catch your errors, and so many tools, etc. But most software developers that I worked at, that I saw at clients' companies, for some reason, all of them use, and myself included, I include myself too, all of us, we use very basic tools. We almost never, I don't know all the handy shortcuts inside my IDE that would help me. And constantly I hear about stuff that can help me, but I never have a time or energy or motivation to try it. So I'm very, very picky about stuff, and also lazy. Yes, I'm lazy. And I'm just curious, after this initial hype of the AI and people jumping on ChatGPT to do everything from from programming to choosing their wife, I just wonder, whether we'll see a downtrend where people will realize just, okay, that's another search engine, or that's another way to get information, and it's not even very, very different or very, very appealing, because it lacks this personal touch that you guys mentioned. So I just wonder, maybe all this AI revolution will just concentrate in very specific areas, very technical areas, narrow areas, and the broad societal impact of that will be relatively limited. Or you think the societal impact is bound to be big in this context? What do you think?
It's hard for me. I'm just gonna. The one thing that I don't like to think, we didn't want to talk about, hey, it's, how intelligent is AI going to become? Is it going to be the, Skynet or whatever? The only thing that I can say is all right, I am kind of watching from a distance, kind of just keeping my eye on it. And that was from getting that, I generated that opinion after watching a podcast with Lex Friedman and Sam Altman, where Lex Friedman interviewed Sam Altman about ChatGPT, and they talked about hey, what are the things we have to worry about? And that's when Sam Altman even said, he's like, even as someone who's, the founder of it, he goes, even I'm a little bit worried. And so I was like, okay, if the person who's creating that saying they're a little bit worried, then I'm just going to I'll keep that in the back of my head. I'm not going to worry about it, but at least I'm going to think about it going forward.
Yeah, same for Elon Musk, who is even more worried.
Exactly.
Interesting. So, okay, now I want to put this all into perspective and go back a little bit. When the programming started, again, before any of us started programming, there was almost no way to get information, right? And if you mention Lex podcast, he introduced very interesting guests, and the older programmers, they constantly mention how they waited for some, journal to be delivered to them to find a code snippet. And I missed this area. I never did that. And then we got books, right? You got structured books, so you could have some amount of information structurally put inside the book. You could buy this book, have it on your shelf, and probably you had to buy a new book next year or in 2 years. but at least you had an access to that. And I remember when I was in high school, the programmers that I saw, that I visited their homes, they had a lot of books. There were bookshelves all around for any technology. And when I learned programming in school, in high school, I also bought the book. I had 2 books or 3 books on some technologies, and I read them to understand what I need to do. And then books became kind of obsolete in the sense that today, if you want to learn a new language or a new framework, I think most people don't even consider buying a book. There are still books, and people buy them, but by and large, people just go and either search for a video course or just learn it themselves from blog posts and just Googling around. And books are today reserved for, let's say, either higher quality, higher order considerations like design and architecture. There's a classical text, or for the human aspect of it. And in this context, I want to mention Erik's books, which I have there on my bookshelf, which I really liked. And right, so basically about the interaction between developers working and how to be efficient, or how to be productive, or how to behave yourself in the organizational structure. And then search came around, and that was when I started being interested in programming. So you could use Alta Vista back then, and other search engine, until Google basically ate everybody's lunch, in Yahoo, until Google ate everybody's lunch, and today people just use Google. And in 2008, we had Stack Overflow appearing, and now people use Google to get answers from Stack Overflow because it works much better than Stack Overflow's built-in search. But nevertheless, I do remember hearing that, now that Stack Overflow is around, maybe we will need much less developers, because basically instead of reading anything, you can get answers to any of your questions in a matter of minutes on this website. Right? So we have Google and Stack Overflow. And I think that now we have these tools, generative AI, that can summarize. And my question to you, if you would need to rank generative AI among other tech shifts, and probably there are some which I missed. I tried to think about all the shifts in the way we get information as software developers. So from journals to books, from books to internet and blog posts, from blog posts to search, index search, and page rank algorithm, and then Stack Overflow, this targeted website where you just can ask whatever you want and get an immediate answer from the community. Do you think these tools, generative AI, ChatGPT, BART, and the next ones to come, do you think this shift is larger than any of the previous shifts? That all the previous shifts, sorry. Or you think that maybe one of these previous shifts is still larger in scope than the shift to generative AI, so we can expect the impact of this shift to be limited by the impact of one of the previous ones? I hope I made myself clear with the question. It's kind of a very long way to ask this question.
Off the cuff, my take is I feel like the shift from journals, books, because that was the beginning of my programming career, especially with more esoteric applications. I was doing real-time and embedded systems early in my career. So I would have these printed binders of stuff. And the switch from that to the internet, to me, it's hard to picture anything coming after that being bigger, just because that gave you the ability for the first time to interact in real time with, say, the person that wrote the original kernel module that you were working with. Suddenly you have access to that person and you never did before. And so to me, Stack Overflow is just a paradigm refinement of that Q&A. And generative AI, at least in the way I've seen it so far, is just another paradigm refinement. So you're asking the question and it goes out and sort of mines the internet and says, here's what the internet thinks. But the existence of that internet, I think, to me, is bigger.
I'd have to agree with Erik in that synopsis, with the internet being kind of just the biggest game changer I experienced. I still remember to this day the first time I experienced it, and just all of a sudden it's just someone opened a brand new door to life. Wow, this is, the world's different at this point. And there's only been a couple of those shifts that I've had. Again, Stack Overflow wasn't one of them. Stack Overflow just made it easy to find this information that was on the internet, and easy to interact with people. The other big shift that I had for me was when I started doing mobile phone development early on with the first Android phone. It's when I finally realized oh, I see the power of these personal computers in the pocket now. And then I'm like, okay, now again, a whole nother door opened up. So I kind of relate AI to similar to that. Like it's things were there, but now it's just a little bit different. It's a little bit easier. So it is a new door for me that is open for possibility. And especially for someone who's worked remotely and is working remotely, where I can kind of just learn. It's like I said, I have a coworker that's sitting with me. So to me, it's been a big paradigm shift in that regard.
Yeah, very interesting. And another topic that I'm not sure we can quantify it, but as tools evolved and supposedly allow developers to become much more productive and supposedly could replace developers with tools, or maybe more developers with less developers, at the same time, I think the complexity of the products that are being developed skyrocketed by even bigger factor than the productivity. And therefore today, I heard people, not just heard, but I also saw this older software, people would write in assembly and stuff, and there will be like a program of like 1,000, 2,000 lines of code, which would be considered very big and complex because you had to really write it inside a text editor, and you had to know exactly what each instruction says because you don't have even meaningful names. And if you have a bug there, then good luck holding all this context and debugging it. Maybe Erik, you maybe called this error by a little bit. And today, like hello world program can get larger than 1,000 lines of code. So yes, there's this shift. And do you think that we will see this increase in complexity going forward? And therefore, maybe the additional productivity boost that all these AI tools will provide will just be swallowed by the increase in the need of this productivity, and the amount of software developers employed will just continue to grow because the demand will just outpace the supply, basically speaking.
I can answer this one right away. I am working in a project right now that is very complex. There is a lot of code in it, a lot of code that I have never seen before. There's a lot of utilities that have been built in there for the last 10 plus 15 years, whatever, how old it is, that I don't understand, that there's just too much stuff going on in it. And I have been able to use things like GitHub Copilot effectively to actually help discover how to use parts of the application, because Copilot plugs right into your source code. It has context information about what's in there. And as I started typing, or I started typing a comment of what I wanted, let it do its job, it would give me something that was close to 80%, but the didn't matter that it was exactly wrong or the syntax wasn't perfect. It showed me how to use that thing that I was like, oh, I did not know how to consume this type of, reactive framework that they have built internally. Now I know how to do it. So I do agree with you that yes, I think that it's going to give us that speed boost and that productivity boost. But then again, it just might help us generate more code that's just going to end more complex. And then, like you said, we're going to continue down this path. So I can see it going that direction. But at the same time, for new projects, I can see it helping us create very maintainable and clean code in the future that can have the opposite effect. So kind of both worlds.
I think that makes sense to me. I'm trying to wrap my head around the, relationship between complexity and, our ability to address that complexity. And it feels like philosophically, if you give us a better ability to address complexity, we will use that to create more complexity.
Exactly.
And I don't really mean that in a bad way. You will now be able to tackle problems that maybe you couldn't have before. So I feel like that relationship will always continue. Like things will continue to get more complex as we develop an ability to manage the complexity.
Oh, that's amazing. You know what this reminds me? What you just said? There was a hypothesis that people would want to live closer to the workplace. And I think I read a study or some, there's a concept in my head. I don't remember where I got it, but basically the world is improving and the infrastructure is improving. But what they discovered that actually people will spend a specific amount of time commuting to the workplace. So as the infrastructure got better, it's not that more people started coming close to the workplace, but on the opposite, people just moved around and started to find jobs in more remote locations because, let's say, you want to spend 1 hour commuting to the work, and as this infrastructure and traffic improves, you can just you can get your job farther away. And what you just said kind of sounds like a similar concept, right? We can accommodate a specific complexity. So if we get a tool that allows us to tame more complexity, we'll just like use the tool to create more complexity because now the tool accommodates some portion of it for us. And that's done what you mentioned.
Mm-hmm. I think it's like kind of an optimistic outlook on humanity. Like the more we're able to tackle complexity, the more ambitious we get in wanting to tackle more complex problems.
Yeah, that goes back to the whole horse thing too. I mean, we went from horses to cars. I mean, cars are, vastly more complex than horses ever were. So, from a mechanical standpoint.
Yeah, exactly. And today, even the concept of a car changes, right? With these Teslas going around and EVs and everything becomes connected to the internet. So even the concept of a car can just change in the next 5 to 10 years and the autopilots, etc. And by the way, that's the one piece of technology. If I could magically make it widely available, I will just go for self-driving cars. I'm so eager to and want it. All right, guys, I think this is a very positive note to end this discussion. Time flies. I can't believe that we've been almost 1.5 hours in. It was amazing. I really think we've had a great discussion. Thank you very much for joining. Just to summarize, what's your take on the market for software developers in several words going forward several years? Is there reason for people to worry? And if someone considers going to the university or course, whatever, just taking that as their career path forward, some young person, would you say that it's a safe bet for the upcoming future? Just to summarize everything we discussed about.
I tell my kids to still learn software development. I still push it. I still think it's a very valid thing. I also encourage them highly to find something else that they're interested in. Maybe that's at the medical profession, the legal profession, something like that. But I tell them that if you learn to become a programmer, if you learn how to program, you don't have to make that your main focus, but know how to do it. So when you do find yourself in a certain industry, being able to program in that industry, you will find a time to use it. And what you'll find is that you will become a unicorn in your industry because you can do things that other people cannot. And I think the same thing is going to be said here about AI. I don't think there's a reason to worry about AI unless you ignore AI. If you completely ignore it and just pretend that it's not there, that's when I would start to worry, because AI to me is another tool that allows me to do my job more effectively. And those that learn to embrace the tool earlier on are just going to have more opportunities and are going to grow quicker than those who don't.
I think for me, if we're giving advice to somebody looking to go into the programming industry, I wouldn't express any hesitation at the moment. I think that what's going on now might change the nature of what those jobs, day-to-day duties look like potentially, but I don't think it'll eliminate the need for those jobs. I think that at its core, if I think about it philosophically, programming is really a very specific instance of taking in process information and generating standard operating procedures, if you will. We're just telling a computer how to do it and codify those things. But automation is, the making of efficiency. And I don't foresee any technological change, current or future, that eliminates the need for that skill set. I just think it might look different in the future. It might be that more people are focused on improving the large language models and the things that go into AI or whatever the case may be. But I think you're still going to need humans with knowledge of how to do automation, at least for the foreseeable future. I haven't seen anything that makes me any less bullish on software as a career.
Amazing. And I can only defer to your opinions. I also think that the fear is unfounded, at least for software developers. I still think that the jury is out for content creation, or specifically what ways of content creation will work in the future and how the division of labor will work there. But for software developers, I think the future is really rosy. And as Donn said, the only problem is for people who ignore these tools. So you cannot be kind of old-fashioned today. You need to stay awake and to really see the shifts that give you real performance and productivity benefits. Folks, I'm so grateful for your time. I think it was a blast. I learned a lot of stuff, and you helped me. Like, I had some very rough ideas, but what you just said, this will give me things and directions to think about for the months to come, I think. So thank you very much for joining and for sharing your opinions and your wisdom with me and others.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you for having me.
And to everybody who is listening or watching, goodbye. Until next time.